Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Larry King? Forget Larry King and his 25 years of interviewing. How about 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 interviews? A Guinness record number of consecutive TV shows, 21,425 from 1950 to 1993. How about a cult favorite, the king of nostalgia, from a regular Joe to a living legend? Joining us to wax nostalgic about nostalgia, to take us down the memory lane of memory lane, is Joe Franklin. If you were a New Yorker in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and into the 90s, you grew up with Joe Franklin and walked down memory lane. His TV and radio shows were, and looking at some of them a half century later, trips of the mind and trips of entertainment. Joe, welcome. I loved it.
It's my pleasure, not my pressure, my pleasure to be with you, Doug.
I've never enjoyed myself so much before a show. I laughed. I watched dozens of hours of Joe Franklin. There are so many ways to go. We'll just let it go. Let's start with, you're a New York character. You were born in the Bronx. Did you ever live anywhere else?
I lived near Tony Curtis when we were kids. We moved into New York.
Bernie Schwartz.
Bernie Schwartz. We became good friends. We would tell our mothers that we're going out to play basketball or play marbles, but we went to the movies. The mothers didn't want us to be in the theater, indoors, because he wanted to be an actor. He wanted to be like Cary Grant. We went to about 5 movies a week. The price was a dime, and in fact, later on, he made a movie with Cary Grant.
You wrote a really interesting book that scholars use called Classics of the Silent Screen, which you wrote with William Everson.
Bill Everson,
that's
who died.
Really a classic work.
Charlie Chaplin called me to say he enjoyed the book. And when he was on my show, I said, Charlie, Mr. Chaplin, I said, people who study your films frame by frame with microscopes and they analyze it page by page and they find Freudian meanings and all the shadings every time to be simplistic, I said, every time you kick the fat man in the behind, you're supposed to be knocking the establishment. He says, Joe, I had nothing in mind except to make people laugh. All these people who study all the Freudian shadings, they're analyzing what was never there in the first place.
I'm an academic, so that's part of our professional responsibilities is to overanalyze. Come on, you're taking away my job.
I didn't mean to do that.
Oh, okay. Talk about New York. Talk about New York today. Talk about New York when you started, when you grew up, and throughout your professional career.
Well, believe it or not, I miss some of the sliminess. I miss some of the days when you could walk down the street and somebody would bump into you and say, "You broke my whiskey bottle. Give me $7." But it's clear, and it's dignified, it's clean, it's nice. I think the mayor. I think the mayor's doing a fantastic. I think he's got the second toughest job in the world, and he's done a remarkable job. So I'm proud. I like the way I like New York now.
You like it?
The mayor?
No, you like New York.
I like the way it's taken shape.
Times Square. You like Times Square?
Yeah, you can't knock it. You can't knock it. It's better than it used to be.
You don't miss the hookers, junkies, and the pimps?
No, it used to be too scary. I'm from the old school of being clean and decent and not missing the pimps.
Okay, let's talk about you. Not immodestly, you're an icon. You worked in TV when TV was new. You were the first talk show host.
I began with a man named Martin Block. Remember a program, Make Believe Ballroom?
Believe it or not, I'm probably dating myself. Yes, I do remember that, listening on the Philco radio with my mother.
I chose his records. I was his record picker. In fact, when he died at the age of 62 during heart surgery, I did a 5-hour tribute to him, which was beautiful, and his wife called me. She was crying. And then he got me my own radio show on WNEW, which is a program called Vaudeville Isn't Dead.
That was in the late 40s, wasn't
about
it?
1949,
about
1950.
Go ahead.
And I get a call one day from Channel 7. They said, Joe, we like your voice on the radio. We're considering lighting up now in the daytime. There was no daytime. TV was on from 5 o'clock at night till sermonettes.
They don't remember that.
Right. They said, Joe, if we give you an hour a day, what kind of a show might you do? I said, how about I do a show of people talking, nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball? They said, Joe, you're out of your mind. You can't do a talk show on television. The word is vision. You got to give them seltzer bottles, pratfalls, baggy pants, got to do burlesque skits. I said, well, if I can't do that, how about because rock and roll was coming. I said, how about a show of kids dancing to records? They said, Joe, you're out of your mind. Who's going to watch kids dance? Dick
Right,
Clark,
and you interviewed him. As a matter of fact, he called you huggable.
Yeah.
I mean, delightful and huggable.
He came along, became a billionaire, but I defied them, Doug. I think I did the first pure talk show. I was the first guy to bring in the couch. There was a big special on A&E recently called It's Only Talk, and they showed how I did that in those days. When I was
Right, and you watch it, and there's both an old quality to it, but there's a very modern quality too. It's really very engaging and very relaxed. But you not only do you know movies, you're a movie persona in your own right. Now, I guess this is part of being an icon. You've been in a couple of Woody Allen movies. You were in Manhattan and Broadway, Danny Rose. You were in Ghostbusters. You were in 29th Street.
Once I've always played myself.
Right.
But once I lost the job because they auditioned me, and then they said, you're not the Joe Franklin type. So I couldn't, I was turned
A
down.
little irony there, no, Joe? I mean, what was your response to not being the Joe Franklin
It
type?
was a left-handed compliment, I guess.
I get, or just plain bizarre.
Right.
Also, you've been the subject of a documentary. 50 million Joe Franklin fans can't be wrong.
It's been on Channel 13. They still play it now late at night when...
Well, forget about late at night. It's a 5-part series on YouTube. Not only do you do radio and TV, do you realize how many YouTube slots you have?
Thousands.
And you have the Ramones, Bing Crosby. It's been described that, in your own words, you've interviewed the greats, the near greats, the ingrates, the has-beens, the never was, and the never will be. So let's talk about the greats.
Right.
What greats have you interviewed? What made them great, and what made them come on the show?
Well, it's amazing that I've told this to very few people, Doug. I never had a talent coordinator. I mean, I've known TV hosts had 1 trillionth my audience, and I had 12 talent coordinators. I did my own booking, and they all came to me. I had 5 U.S. presidents. I had Ronald Reagan 5 times. I had Charlie Chaplin. I had John Wayne, Cary Grant. I had Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby. I mean, it's endless.
Henry Kissinger, Bette
several.
Midler,
Joe
Julia Roberts.
Barbara Streisand was my singer.
Please, excuse me, Joe DiMaggio. It's really incredible.
Eddie Fisher was my singer.
Okay, so those are the greats. But you also had the has-beens, never wers, and never will be.
I had what was known as an eclectic mix.
Excuse me, there was almost like a random quality. You could have Cary Grant and the tap dancing jump ropers.
I would have Margaret Mead with the man who whistles through his nose. I would have Ronald Reagan with a plate twirler and with a hog caller, with Tiny Tim. I believed in an eclectic mix.
Now, how did you put together the show? I mean, what was the nature of putting together the show? I mean, and you did multiple shows a day plus radio. I mean, you were on a couple of times a day.
3 times a day at one time.
On TV.
You know who I want to mention? Bill Cosby. Bill.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Nicest guy. He came on with me when he was unknown, and then he became the #1 star in the world. And then when he had a new book, his first appearance was always on the Joe Franklin show. So.
Right, and in fact, I guess it was the 40th anniversary show. I mean, he really thanks you for giving him his star. Jay Leno does the same thing.
This is my big breakthrough. I grew up watching this show.
Elaborate. Don't stop now.
This is true. This
Don't.
is true.
You too, right?
I called my mother last night and I said, I'm doing the Joe Franklin. She said, oh, yes.
Who was the guest that you really wanted to get and never got?
Greta Garbo. We'd meet in the street, and we went to film retrospectives together, but she wouldn't appear on any show at any time anywhere. She was offered a blank check signed to make another movie, go on a TV show, but she just wanted to be alone, and I respected that, but she was a dear friend of mine.
Who was your favorite interview?
Bing Crosby. I always thought of Bing, Doug, as being what you might call mechanically reproduced. I thought of Bing on radio, on TV, on movies, on record. But when he walked toward me, flesh and blood, that day, I think I melted. I did my best. And can I tell you one thing about Bing? He was not the friendliest guy. He was very cold, very aloof. But that day with me, he was so warm and huggable and lovable. Maybe he was showing off to, he would tell his songwriters, don't put the word I love you twice in one song. Mm-hmm. That's how, it's ironic that the most romantic balladeer of all time told the songwriters, don't say I love you twice in one song. But I think that was my favorite interview.
What happened that made you laugh? I mean, you're doing an interview and all of a sudden something happens, then you just can't help yourself. And you
I would laugh at some of the things. One time I had on Al Cap. Remember Al Cap?
Oh, Al Cap, definitely.
With Joe Pine.
Oh, Joe Pine, one of the loud screaming.
They both had wooden legs.
Real? I mean, you mean figuratively that
In
they
real
could
life,
drink?
they
No, they had real wooden legs. Okay,
They got
prosthetics.
into an argument. So I said, boys, why don't you take off your legs and duel with each other? So when I said that, that made me laugh. You know, I just.
No, I'm making yourself laugh. It's fine.
Said
What about your most bizarre interview?
Oh, I've had people who didn't like me. I mean,
Oh, go.
out of 500,000 guests, maybe. One time, Jerry Lewis, I said, Jerry, how's Dean Martin? He said, don't you know we broke up 10 years ago? He said, no wonder they called you the nostalgia kid. Took a swing at me. No, later on we made up. We became. But
Yeah, I mean, a literal poke?
yeah, real swing.
Oh, nice.
And then one time, Rosemary Clooney, I said, Miss Clooney, I saw Jose Ferrer last night in Man of La Mancha. She says, you know, we're not married anymore, Charlie. I said, listen, first of all, Miss Clooney, my name isn't Charlie, my name is Joe. And second of all, I just wanted to point out, I didn't know your ex-husband was such a good singer. She said, goodbye, Charlie, because I walks off the set. These were live TV days.
Right.
But later on, she was writing, she wrote a book, she was going through a mental breakdown at that time, and she apologized to me. So, you know.
Wait a minute, I saw one, Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah.
Tell me the Ernest Borgnine story.
I didn't know how to say it. I mean, he had won the Academy Award for Marty.
Right.
And I said, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. I never heard his name pronounced. I said, here's Ernest Borgnini.
Right. You can't pronounce Italian names. People have a problem with
He
that.
got furious, but we became good. He's 93 years old. He's still a very dear friend of mine.
Anything make you cringe, even though you seem totally unflappable?
Well, I mean,
Cringing moments.
there was a big article in Time magazine or Look about 6 months ago about who started things, and it says that David Letterman does stupid pet tricks. I started stupid pet tricks, and I cringed when the guy one time a snake came on me and bit me on TV.
That's more than cringing.
Oh boy, but I got no regrets, no problems. I've enjoyed it, and nowadays everybody has got its own TV talk show, right?
Come on, even me.
Yeah, no,
I mean, come on. I mean, we've gone from Joe Franklin to Doug Muzzio. Oh my God. What about times that you were really moved in an emotional sense?
Well, I had I love the old time Conrad Nagel. Remember the name Conrad Nagel, the old time movie star, and he was
Sorry.
he made me cry. He told me when sound came in and the stars couldn't talk, all the big stars were all foreigners. He once made 5 movies at one time, going from set to set, reading the words on a blackboard, and the whole 5 movies came out great because he was one of the few who could speak without an accent. So I cringed that anybody could be that great. Conrad Nagel.
Ooh. Talk about your relationship over the years with Hollywood as both a place and an idea.
Well, my best friend was Rudy Valley. I lived in Rudy Valley's house when he used to go to the coast, and he was very upset. He wanted to play Patton. He wrote a letter to Darryl Zanuck that he wanted to play Patton. George
Really?
C. Scott got the job.
Right.
But my idea about Hollywood is it's kind of not for me, too laid back. It cost me $35 per taxi ride from Rudy Valley's house down into the valley. So.
And that was, I mean, that's got to be worth triple or quadruple that now.
Right.
Surprised. Yeah, I mean, again, you're unflappable. What surprised you?
The thing that surprised me was the day I walked in the street and 20 people said, Joe, Billy Crystal impersonated you on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, we got to talk about
I couldn't watch that show because I was on the radio from midnight to 5. So I finally got to see the show, and I says, Billy, one of us is lousy.
40 years he's been sitting and spritzing, sitting and talking, sitting and nadling and schmelling with the greats, the near greats, the ne'er-do-wells, the good people. I've had the young, the old, the Weird Al Yankovic, the kids in the tight pants with their hair, the guitars, the things. I've seen it all. I've had it. I've smelled it. I've touched it. And you know what? It's fun. I like this business. I love it. It's my life. Can you say show business is your life, Joe?
And may you live as long as you want, and may you never want as long as you live.
Maybe a superstar.
Those, I guess there was 4 or 5 bits that he did that were truly hysterical.
Ladies and gentlemen, it ain't just paint. Remember those?
Well, you used to do the ads by yourself, and I mean, folks who are watching now, if they're really interested, they really have to go to YouTube and watch this stuff. Also, they have to read the Wikipedia piece on you, which is very smart.
I would have 15 products on the desk live. 15.
Right.
all the puddings and the olive oils and the Canada Dry ginger, all 20 Castro could a little make-believe couch. There was no room for me. I was surrounded by Mother Murphy.
How did that go? Let's go back to the actual show. How did you set this all up? There seems that you called it eclectic, but there seems to be a sort of totally improv
Nobody
sensibility.
thought we'd catch what you know, Doug. When I broke into TV, they put me on for an hour a day when TV was brand new. My deal with the station was 50-50 on the revenue, 50-50. Within 3 months, I was making $28,000 a week because they never thought that people would buy advertising. But I became
mackerel.
Let me tell you, so I became the matinee idol of the ad agency. So they cut me down. They cut me down to 20%, then 10%. So I had no choice. But they never dreamed that daytime TV would ever catch on. They thought it was just to fill space, you know.
Wow.
Occupied.
Okay, let's move into that. What do you think about talk show hosts now? I mean, you were a pioneer. You established a career. You established a genre. Where is that genre now?
You can't knock what pays the rent. I mean, they're getting millions, but I think they've gotten kind of mean-spirited. They've gotten kind of evil, sometimes ridiculous. That they knock everybody, and they're very severe in knocking the politicians. Maybe they deserve it in many cases. But look, Conan O'Brien got $32 million for being fired from NBC. You can't.
You wish.
These people are what you call beneficiaries of the electronic or the technological era. They're just there at the right time. And I met a guy last week who didn't have his own TV talk show. I met there was such a doesn't have his own. But
there are a couple of people who don't have their show.
I met one. Yeah.
What's wrong with them?
But they've gotten a little bit mean-spirited. It'll never come back to my way, but someday it might come back at least to pleasant. I think Oprah Winfrey is great. People like that, you know, but it's a different world.
Okay, you've been around a long time, and you've outlasted and been more successful than
during my tenure.
Hundreds.
People always ask me, what's the secret of longevity in my field? Where the mortality rate is really staggering.
It is.
Staggering. So 500 talk show hosts came and went during my tenure locally. 500. I always say the answer.
Wow.
I always say the answer to longevity in my field is sincerity. And once you learn to fake that, then you got it made.
Nice, very nice. A little Machiavelli.
Picked up.
But it's not only that. I mean, my wife and I were watching your 40th anniversary show, and she turned to me because I was talking about this interview, and she said, "You know what it is about Joe Franklin? He's totally not ego involved. He is just enjoying the conversation." And is that a fair characterization?
I try to look in the people's eyes, not their nose or their belly button. I try to look in there. And one thing I've learned is not to be afraid. Whenever you get a big, I had Shirley Temple on. They said, Joe, don't mention Shirley Temple's old movies. She want to get up and walk away. She's on to talk about United Nations and being the ambassador to Czechoslovakia and Girl Scout cookies and penal reform and women's rights. But I said to myself, how could I love Shirley Temple's old movies. I did 90 minutes talking about her old movies, nose to nose. And she went back to California and sent me one of her old scrapbooks. That scrapbook was beyond value. So.
Because in a sense that defines her. It's got to be part of what she was.
When I had on Jane Wyman, apparently she had a kind of an unhappy divorce from Ronald Reagan. They said, Joe, don't mention Ronald Reagan. She's here to talk about her dear friend Rosalind Russell, who died of arthritis. But I said, how can you not talk about the president? I did 60 minutes talking about the president. And she loved it. She was crying.
One of the things that I sort of remembered about Joe Franklin was that it was very personable and very soft. But watching it over the last couple of weeks, I mean, you're not Roger Clemens, but they're not all softballs. They're, some really very sophisticated types of questions, particularly with the movie folks. You seem to be most interested in that.
So perceiving. There are many, many people out there. I mean, those who made a little fun of me, but there are a lot of people out there that are a little more intelligent who said, did Joe Franklin really say that? I made a very strong point, but in a boyish, almost naive way.
Oh, yeah. There's one scene in the 40th anniversary where you asked Cesar Romero, very nicely, was he in any bombs? And his response was great. I've been in tons of bombs. You need bombs.
And Corinne Calvé on that same panel, she said that if she had given in more often to the executives who wanted to be intimate or romantic with her,
Right.
he would have gone further. So he jumped on her. He said, "What do you mean? All you women say the same thing."
My wife was offended by his reactions, and she doesn't like him anymore, so he's out. So listen,
big
so
fight.
remembering memory lane. So what I did was I called up my mother and her husband. I called up my mother-in-law, and I obviously spoke to my wife. So I called my mother-in-law Grace and her husband Sal, and I say Joe Franklin, and you say. They said old-time radio, old-time movie stars, and then Sal said it was 100 years ago. And then I called up my mother-in-law, and she said, again, old-time stars on the little screen. And I just went on and on and on and asked people in their 50s and above about Joe Franklin. And it was always very warm and very positive. And they sort of all remembered one or two incidents of this. If you had to redo a show, what show would you redo?
What I would probably do is ask Bing Crosby to sit with me and do a second-hour taping. Frank Sinatra, a second-hour taping. I once asked Frank, I said, Frank, when you were a kid, you were under contract to 3 people. I said, you were under contract to Harry James, Tommy Dorsey, and your press agent, George Evans. How could that be? You know what he said? He said, Joe, I'll tell you something, that hearts and contracts were meant to be broken. I never forgot that line.
Nice.
And
where does memory lane come from? How did it originate in your head?
I was on Channel 7 for...
Now, Channel 7 then wasn't ABC, it was Jay-Z?
WJZ TV.
Yeah.
And my very first guest ever was a lady named Fannie Hurst, who wrote Imitation of Life,
I don't know.
Backstreet, Humoresque. So
Okay. Vaguely.
We went to her apartment after the show at the Hotel des Artistes across the street, and she showed me all her library of books. One book was called Humoresque, and the first chapter was called A Long Bunch of Memory Lanes. I said, Miss Hurst, can I borrow that phrase? She said, yeah.
Oh, nice.
So I called my show Joe Frank's Memory, until everybody in the world started doing memory. Alan Freed's Memory Lane, Murray Kaufman's Memory Lane. So
Oh, right, they did, as a matter of fact.
became contagious, yeah.
Looking back on it, what makes you, you smile a lot. What makes you smile the most?
I would say the comedians. I love comedians. And also the fact that I gave the first exposure ever on TV. Barbra Streisand, Bill Cosby, Flip Wilson, Bette Midler, Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Joan Rivers.
Woody Allen?
Woody Allen, of course.
And Bette Midler sang for you.
She was my singer with I forget who was on here, famous songwriter. But I gave the first exposure to maybe 100 people.
Now, they come back and they thank you. I know I saw Cosby on the set come back and thank you. And Leno come back and say,
Jay Leno, I got him his first bookings. I would say, with the exception of a few, most of them do not. I didn't mean to get this heavy, but I represent to them the times they were broke. And when they see me nowadays in the streets, they sort of walk across. They don't want to be reminded of the days they were broke. Most of them.
Oh, interesting.
It's human nature. It's shallow, but I think maybe we'd be the same. I don't know, but it is kind of shallow that they don't know.
Yeah, but I bet you, and we talked about this earlier, you get stopped in the street constantly, right?
I can't walk, really.
Just talk about, a typical week of Joe Franklin running into people. What do people say?
Joe, how old are you? Joe, my grandfather was on your show. Do you have the tape? I said, I'll go look. I said, out of 28,000 shows, I saved maybe 500 tapes. I said, I'll look, but I don't really look.
Do you ever go back and look at shows? Obviously you did when you put together the 40th anniversary show, but do you go back and look at any particular shows?
I love my old shows. The only thing I don't watch modern TV. I watch 60 Minutes. I watch your show and I watch the Ed Sullivan Show. I loved.
Another one I grew up with.
I adored it. I used to go to the theater with him. He was just. His show, by the way, was his life. When his show ended, he went berserk. When Walter Winchell's show ended, he didn't care. But Ed Sullivan, that show was his life, and I miss him. He was a great guy.
Now, you've done TV and radio for, 62 years?
Longer than anybody, right?
Longer than anybody. What are you doing now?
Well, I'm on Bloomberg Radio. I do a thing called The Business to Show Business. Is on every day.
Yeah, it cycles over the weekend. That's
This week I got Colin Quinn does a one-man show.
Okay.
I get very good guests. I do a lot of college lectures. I'm very popular on the campus, on the university.
What do they ask you? What do the college kids ask
After I do my lecture about the old movies, the old radio shows, and Eddie Cantor and Al Jolson, then we do a Q&A period. They ask me what's my favorite movie? What do I think about today's movies? What do I think about Lillian Gish, D.W. Griffith? What do I think about
I mean, you ever like a history book.
Erich von Sternberg? And it's a question of, I reminisce about Bob. I love Bob Hope. I reminisce about.
Oh, well, clearly in the interview that you did with Hope that you played on the 40th anniversary, that was really affectionate. That was
He
fun.
says he used to watch me when he was a kid.
Yeah, right.
That was
right.
Little,
You're not that old.
little facetious, right?
Okay, Andy Warhol once said that everybody's famous for about 15 minutes. Lots of folks got their an hour on your show. We talked about the greats and we talked about some of the near greats. Talk about the never have beens and never weres, and talk about the people coming to your office, which we'll talk about either this week or next week, doing the routines in the hallway.
Well, I was very friendly toward the broken down cabaret and nightclub singers of yesteryear. They would make their very last appearance, their last fling, their last moment in the spotlight on the Joe Franklin Show, and I just loved it. I adored it. I had certain people that open house. They could walk in the show without being. I had Georgie Jessel 100 times. 100 times Georgie Jessel.
And they just sort of wandered into the show?
Without being booked. They had open house. Jessel would walk in. Who else? Otto Preminger 100 times. Remember the famous film producer?
Sure.
And Sal Mineo was a dear friend of mine, would walk in. Tony, I had maybe 15 people like that who would just walk in and sit with me and reminisce with me and reminisce about the future. We always talk about.
Right, reminiscing about the future. And then you called yourself the king of nostalgia, and we'll talk about that next week. But let me close by, a little of your self-reflection. You said that you were a man with no talent. You can't sing, you can't dance, you can't do stand-up. What do you do?
I would always ask the guests to do it for me. I would always ask at the end, I would ask for anything, some little inspirational maxim. Eddie Cantor once said to me, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And Al Jolson once said to me on New Year's Eve, he said, Joe, here's to our wives and sweethearts, may they never meet. That broke the audience.
Nice.
But my talent was a little bit like Ed Sullivan. I was a good pointer, and many times I would have to suppress the answers. I knew the answers, but
we're gonna have to talk about that on the next segment because I can't help myself sometimes.
Well, I'm invited back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Are you kidding me? My special thanks to Joe Franklin for being on the show and for the joy he continues to bring us strolling down memory lane. Mr. Franklin will join us on next week's show. You got to join us. You can't miss him. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.